hello. I love seeing your shiny face on association transformation. How are you, Andrew?
I'm good. I'm good, Elisa. Uh, where are you? You're in the
Um,
obviously you're in the car,
it's
but
I'm in a car. I'm balancing between motherhood and boss lady business.
I get it.
This is real life. You wanted to bring us on camera. You wanted to go live.
Yeah.
That's what you get.
I'm done. I'm cool with it. It's fine. It's good. And can I just say that your sound quality is exceptional?
Oh my gosh. That's a great shirt. I really like that shirt.
Thank you.
All right, cut to it. Derek's sitting here patiently waiting. He's got places to go, things to do. So, Association Transformation, the podcast. Derek, welcome so much. Derek Mulhern with Mulhern Coaching and Consulting. I'm so glad we finally get you. We've been kind of tossing around the schedule for a while now, which maybe is the ultimate demonstration of our topic today. But thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to a conversation today. And thanks for joining from the car. I think the sound is lovely too. And Andrew, you also have a wonderful shirt on.
As do you, my friend. I have to say, first thing I noticed, I thought, now there's a man with good taste in shirts. Thank you.
And you guys both have the bookcase situation going on over your. It's
Oh my
actually
God,
quite
yeah, I just
nice.
realized we have matching furniture almost. This is amazing. I love it. Excellent. Brilliant.
To
Oh
the viewers, we did
goodness.
plan all of this, except we didn't.
Yes, yes. So Derek, tell me a little bit about how you kind of came into the association space. I mean, obviously, our audience are all, 38 listeners now. We're really excited about our international expansion, but you're a fixture in this industry. I've known of you for a very long time, and we have mutual friends in the association space. But how'd you get here, and what's your expertise?
Um, I wish I was one of those people that said I have planned my career into the association sector forever. When you meet one of them, please let me know. But I kind of fell into it, like most people do. I have a background like way, way, way back in the day of just being engaged with student organizations and associations as an actual student. So again, way back in the day. And just had like a really deep affinity to like the programming, the leadership development that it gave me. And so, as much as I told myself that I was going into nonprofits, what I didn't realize for quite some time was that I was actually going into like member based organizations, which were associations.
Yeah.
And then I got the flavor of like both trade and business. And so I've been really running in the space, really in the membership and leadership space for a long time, until I kind of elevated more to the strategic level. And that's really brought me into this like conversation around culture within what we do in associations, the weird things that we end up playing in. And so that's just the super high level of it.
Yeah, yeah. When I was telling Andrew, if I had a leadership coach or an executive coach, like it would be Derek. Like Derek's the kind of guy that I would want to be my like personal culture leadership kind of balanced wellness advisor in this space. So thanks for joining us. And I will also admit that Andrew scrunched his face a little bit when I told him about this topic. He's a bit of a grumpy old man if you haven't heard of him. But when I said we wanted to chat about wellness, and yes, the most overused word of the 2024 burnout, he gave me the scrunchy face. And
Oh no.
do you need to defend yourself?
Yeah, I do actually. I do actually. I gave you the scrunch. I don't remember giving you the scrunchy face. I think that might just be the way I look at you.
That might be your.
But actually, if I did give a scrunchy face, it's because I think it's a subject area that we don't talk enough about. Wellness and in leadership, and I think it's because also because as you know, and some listeners will know, not being well in a leadership position is something that I've directly experienced, and it felt a wee bit like, oh right, okay, is this going to churn up bad memories for me? But actually no, on reflect, I reflected on it, I unscrewed my face, and I thought, yeah, this is a good conversation we should be having. This conversation I wish I'd had way before I started in any leadership role. So yeah, I'm don't listen to her, Derek. She's just being mean to me for no reason.
Oh, well, this is our summer wellness check-in with our, our new friend of the family, Derek Mulhern, and we toss these words around: wellness, burnout. I almost say yada 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 at the end of that. They've become so cliche in a sense. What does this even mean anymore? And how do you know when you're at a place of needing to ask for help? Because I'm in a car. Burnout feels normal now. Being overwhelmed seems like normal. What are these definitions, and how do we know when you're in the red?
Yeah, I think it's a good question and not a straightforward answer always. I think a lot of the work that I do with people is to really help them get in touch with a level of intuition in this. Here's the reality. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably a high achiever that at some point in your life is going to experience burnout. And so if we can just start the conversation by normalizing that and not sitting here in this conversation about like, ooh, make sure you don't burn out, or if you burn out, this means X, Y, and Z. And we just kind of normalize the fact that it's going to happen, but that our goal is not to operate on top of it, but to recognize it. I think that the things to really recognize are like, one, bodily sensations. Like you can literally just feel the exhaustion, and your capacity is just not what it usually is. And so I think that's the first place to look. But then just secondly, like, there's an intuition aspect to this of, am I giving more than I'm actually receiving? And not in a like, oh, I need to get paid a certain amount, but like, how does this fill my bucket or not fill my bucket?
You know what I found, and we talk from a staff perspective. All three of us were association staff, and I see this more and more often at the board level. These board leaders who've come through the last few years and either had terms as chair that they never ever expected, or made it through in facing challenges that were unique to them. I find boards more frayed, and not in their relations with each other, but just as humans. I mean, talk about high performers. They have jobs, they have families, they're also taking on these volunteer roles that require a great deal of them when they're at that level. How do you help an association leader address burnout and wellness within the board without looking too, I don't mean this in the wrong way, too soft?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question. Like, and I've like pondered my brain in it before, but I don't think I've like played in it as much. So let's play in it right now.
Yeah, let's dive.
I think that part of this starts with, and I promise I'm not going to over coin the word culture during this conversation today, but some of this starts with the culture of like where our leaders are actually coming from and who it is that they're being in the conversation that they're having. Like, is this genuinely a like, I am looking at what's good for you, for the organization, and like I care about your well-being? Or is this like, I want something out of this conversation? And even the most well-intentioned person can want something out of that conversation. Like, we are in a performance-driven world. And so if they feel like a board member isn't living up to an expectation, they might be trying to have a like, I care for you, and ultimately I want X, Y, and Z. So really coming from a place with no judgment and like open curiosity to invite the conversation rather than like do the conversation to the board member.
And I think that's true in sort of many scenarios with board members. Even purely from a practical performance perspective, as opposed to a personal sort of any sort of personal performance, as it were. But I think with board members especially, we have to remember, I would suggest 9 times out of 10, if they're not performing, it's because they feel completely out of their depth, because they don't. They're not living and breathing the association 24/7 like staffers are, and they are getting parachuted into environments. They are, with people looking to them to make decisions, to demonstrate leadership when perhaps, it's interesting, when perhaps you said high achievers, Elisa, but actually a lot of board members are, and for some board members, this is possibly the most senior leadership position they've ever occupied. And I have huge amount of empathy and sympathy for individuals who are put in that position, and without the adequate support, ongoing, first up, training, development, education, peer support, but then ongoing support throughout their sort of career as a non-executive director. I see it an awful lot, not necessarily burnout, but more of a kind of a fear of putting a foot wrong and making a mistake because they don't necessarily understand what their role and responsibilities are. That's usually what I always am. And then that puts huge amount of pressure on their shoulders that then manifests as all sorts of poor behaviors around the board table.
Well, I love what Derek said about the duality. You can be sincere and have a human connection with someone and want to put their needs first while still having an agenda, while
Absolutely.
still needing to achieve something. And I like the recognition that this is an area of grays. There's not black and white here. It's not all or nothing. And the tapestry of human relation and human emotion is going to ebb and flow over the course of, the annual meeting, over the course of nominations, over the course of, year-end reviews. Things are going to change, and we have to give each other grace. So, I guess that's my next question, Derek, whether you're looking at your staff or you're looking at your board and you want to spend the second half of this year investing in a culture of humanity, a culture of wellness and appreciation, what's the first step? Do you have to survey and ask people how they feel, or can you just jump in and focus on appreciation, or do you jump in and focus on breaks and vacation? Like, where do you start?
Yes, no, yes, no, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We'll talk to you next time.
Exactly. So many of those, they're nuanced, but I think they're kind of straightforward. First and foremost, like, I have seen so many association leaders be like, I have the solution for what my employees are experiencing. Those were anecdotal experiences you heard, and those are from the same people that always say things. And you have no idea if that solution is going to be supportive or not. So it's about really hearing our employees. And those can be through very basic surveys, very basic ways to collect information. What I will say is, do not collect that information if you're not willing to hear it and then respond to it, because that can be one of the most destructive things to a culture. And I've seen it happen far too many times. I know that I want X solution, so I'm going to survey the people. Oh, the data didn't show the solution I wanted. I'm going to move forward with it anyway. And so, like, then people just feel unheard, and that's no way. I shouldn't say that's no way to lead. It is a way to lead. It's not a way to garner a culture of like the impact that you likely want to have on your organization. And so just kind of willy-nillying it with ideas and thoughts of like how to build and create isn't necessarily always going to get there. What I will say is that creating space for your employees to really feel heard, for them to really know what you as an organization are committed to in your values is going to really like level you up. And I'll say that, and we can have a conversation about it if you want to, but I think one of the challenges I see in this place sometimes is that we have association leaders that are like totally willing to like listen to their employees. Oh my gosh, it's annual convention. We are so busy. We have so much going on. And they like hear all of these things, and then they actually do take the data and they want to make changes. But I think what's unclear is like, what are the values we've agreed upon as an organization, both at the board level, the staff level, the organization level, so that that employee can then make the decision if they fit into the values. And that allows for you to communicate your value alongside of it, rather than just having solutions that aren't actually aligned with anything.
And I think we're very good as an industry at, if we take the example of, what are our values, what are our leadership values, I think we're very good at discussing issues or opportunities like that, but doing it in the abstract. have a conversation. We'll have this fabulous away day. We'll have a residential event. We'll really get into the nuts and bolts of who we are and why we exist and what we're doing, and we'll map out our values. But then we then don't bother applying them to anything or referencing them or remembering them until the next sort of a residential comes around. And do you remember we did that exercise about values, and it says and actually I think that disconnect then just replicates itself throughout the organization. And I think then it becomes what for me one of the massive headaches that I had and still do suffer from it, is being able to sort of gain perspective. You end up being in this arguably this quite negative echo chamber where everybody's feeling the same for maybe different reasons. Everyone's feeling put upon, everyone's feeling that rudderless or directionless, and it's really difficult to break that cycle, because you are, like you say, you're operating in such a relatively small environment. You forget to reach out to your peers, your friends in the industry, your stakeholders, your members. It becomes almost a burden to sort of break out of the echo chamber. But for me, I think being able to generate a sense of perspective as a leader and being able to convey that perspective, which ultimately in the membership sector we do great work, but it's not life or death, is it? So there's unless
what? How dare you? How dare you?
This is the association of life and death. It's not, it's not. Nothing should be that pressured, that precious, that we can't take a step back and gain some perspective on our situation and address it and take our time to address it, rather than what I often see, and I'm sure, Derek, you see it as well, is knee-jerk reactions to our culture is broken and therefore we have to fix it. And then it becomes, you're almost in like some kind of perpetual vicious cycle where you can't break out of that, because you're perpetually trying to break a broken culture but not really doing it in a informed way.
Well, and this is where I'm struggling between the two of you, in that there's a spectrum. There's those anecdotes that you referred to, Derek, the small handful, maybe the naysayers, the dissatisfied. Then there's the core values, which are kind of the most generic, broad brush way to address a culture. And I'm wondering, as an association leader, how you find that middle ground where you are developing and addressing needs and challenges that apply to maybe not everyone, but they're not reactions, they're not individualized solutions, but at the same time, they're not just that poster of the cat, hanging on a rope that says, go teamwork or whatever. Like,
You're so 2005, honestly, Elisa, my goodness.
You know what? Like that shirt anymore.
Yeah, and I think that part of this is like, let's also be real. While I put my little cap on and I'm like, I'm going to do my consulting job, my coaching job, like a survey aligning with values sounds like a super picturesque, great idea. And to staff, it's like, cool, another values exercise, like another staff survey. And so I think I use those as like really big benchmarks and baselines. And I think there's two things. One, really actually integrating your values into your culture is where a lot of us miss the boat. That's where a lot of organizations, they have them and then they stop. And so I think part of what I'm offering is like, okay, do the exercise and keep going. Like actually have the support that you need to move that along so that there is common language that we're able to have. Because without the common language, all we're doing is having nebulous conversations. Someone once told me, and I really live by this, without an idea of what the commitment is that we have only problems to solve. Yeah. Now, if we have a commitment, we're going to have an opportunity to have like a lot of breakdowns and understand how we want to move forward to relate to a new way of going about it and finding a solution that's not just solving a problem. Yeah. And so a piece of this is like, how do we actually socialize and bring values to life? But the other part of it is, how do we actually hear what our employees are trying to say and partner with them rather than assume that we need to fix things for them? So partner with them to like find solutions or come to the conclusion that that's not something we're going to be doing as an organization, and tell me what you need because of that, and also know that this is where we're at so we can find alignment or agreement.
Yeah.
I really like the when you're
I like the word nebulous. I like
Yeah.
the use the word nebulous. That's an extra bonus point for you, Derek, today.
when you're talking about, sort of the focus as an industry, I get, it can sometimes feel that we're very, very good at finding problems for solutions that we have, and we're often sort of driven by solving problems with sometimes we could be problem focused instead of purpose focused. And I really like, the idea of having that conversation across the organization and talking about, what is our purpose, and being able to articulate that throughout the organization, at every level, volunteers and staff and members, being able to articulate the purpose. I think it gives an inherently more sort of positive feeling around what it is that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, because and negates that, like I said, that focus that sometimes feels that all we're ever doing is dealing with problems. I don't know, Lisa. I mean, you.
So, and you mentioned members. We've all mentioned members somewhere in our ideas and our shares here. But as an organization, as a CEO, a chief staff executive, how much do you really need to tell your members you're doing or you're working towards when you're dealing with an internal staff culture?
Oh.
Core value development. I mean, do you want your members to know that you're investing in that? Sure. But is that then going to make them think that there are problems that may or may not exist, or that you as a leader are or are not capable? How much do you really pull back the curtain of those internal cultural opportunities, we'll say, and let your members know is going on? Is there a right answer to that? I mean, my knee jerk would be to keep it internal.
Well, I don't think
But
I don't think it's knee jerk. I think, in fairness to you, I think you're basing that instinct is based on all your experience of knowing what happens when we involve members in conversations that they're not always fully informed about, and it often leads them down a path of assumptions that then somehow lead back to the board, that lead back to you, and it again creates this kind of awful scenario. So I don't think it's a knee jerk. I agree. As a chief exec, I wouldn't be sharing internal. I would absolutely, the organization, the membership needs to know that we have a positive internal culture, and we spend time investing in ourselves as well as in the membership. Although, interestingly, it's that investing in ourselves piece that I was always coming up against a brick wall, which was, we need to be spending the money on what the membership wants, constantly failing to recognize that a really, well, positive, healthy, engaged staff base is inherently good for the membership and does result in, good outcomes for the membership. So my instinct is, no, they just need to know what's happening.
Well, Derek came from student organizations, and I would say part of my hesitation to share is that most of my membership experiences were where the membership audience by demographic was much older than the staff. And so that generational perspective of, the staff wanting balance and wanting, folks are wanting to be considered a human being and not just a staff person to suck it up and work harder. Those two audiences didn't always communicate in the same way. On staffs, do staff of student organizations have, because there's possibly more alignment in the ages of the staff and the members, is there more sympathy? Is there more willingness to invest in the development of staff when you have a younger membership? Or am I totally
my
broad brushing?
my experience with like working with student, youth, whatever you want to, however you want to frame it, one organization was young people, however you want to frame it, is that those are usually very focused on human development, like developing a young person into a professional in some way. So because of that, that's like the culture of like what's going on, like almost like it's really embarrassing if we find out that internally they're a hot mess and not practicing what they preach. And so there's just a completely different dynamic around it. But I would also say that the students aren't always, and I shouldn't say always, but my experience has been that they're not equipped to have the conversation or know the conversation to the depth that it's going to be supportive. But I also just look at this from like, I am a member of the International Coaching Federation. Guess what I want from them? My credential, education, and to make my job as a coach easier. I don't need to know like how it's going at the staff level. And if I found out that it was or was not going well, I don't know what it would change about my perspective of how I show up as a member. Now, if I was on the board of directors, maybe I would care, but I don't see that as my job. I see infrastructure in place to ensure that the staff is supported. And I want my credential to be cheaper than it is and not have to take the test over me.
Well, I guess they're not going to be a sponsor of this show. Thanks, Derek. Thanks.
They're great. They're great.
Yeah, you're right. And, Andrew and I talk about this all the time, where there's this false perception from board members or staff that the membership cares a lot more about all the little details than they really do. But I've also been surprised with how much the staff have, relationships, are in communication with volunteer leaders, with members in general, usually the ones that are on committees or attend or highly participatory. And I'm surprised by how much staff are willing to share with the members about what's going not so right at the culture level.
I think one of the interesting things is, and I don't have the solution to this. If I did, I think I could make a lot of money, is that there's not always alignment in associations about how we communicate with volunteers and members, because I think we can sit here and say it is management, it's the CEO or executive directors or president, whoever we want to call it, it's their job to manage the organization. It is the board's job to have governance, strategic oversight. But where that gets sticky is when staff decides that they need to go tell a volunteer something, good, bad, or ugly. And then that creates the cycle of them being engaged with staff. It's just not the chief executive. Mm-hmm. And so I think that you never want to like keep your staff from like sharing what they want to share if that's what they see needs to be done. But I don't think they always understand the ramifications of what they're inviting in to the organization, not just in a like oversight way, but in a like, oh, this is how this should operate, when it may just in the long run be detrimental to what we're looking for the organization.
And so many cultures and systems break down when internal communications and expectations around internal communications are not articulated. When I work with boards, if there's a problem at board level, communications are always at the core of it, as in we're not communicating, and we're not communicating well, or we're not communicating through the channels we should. And I certainly don't, I always advocate that staff should have relationships with, let me rephrase that, professional relationships with,
That's a different podcast, Andrew. That's a very different podcast.
Committee members and, active volunteer leaders. Absolutely. How else will staff understand, when crafting the value proposition? We need those members. We need their knowledge and expertise to help us craft and put out the door the membership proposition. However, I think, I'm not surprised when staff are effectively sharing state secrets outside the organization, when I don't see any protocol agreed for internal communications. So why should I be surprised that they breach in, well, what I would consider breaching confidences potentially, and opening up many different cans of worms. If there's nothing to say, you shouldn't be doing that. Your relationship should be about this. And that's not, I'm not talking about whistleblowing. When we were chatting, I was thinking, if this isn't about whistleblowing, I think that's a completely different issue. But I think just generally, staff, a leaky ship is not a good place to be working, because I often, I recall, I say often, but I've quite a few times having conversations with directors about issues that I know that I hadn't spoken to them about in the first place, that I hadn't briefed them on yet, that actually I wasn't even aware of. And then you get into whole issues around, but it was staff having those conversations, and then you get into issues around trust. And and the last thing you want to do is to undermine that trust-based environment. So I think understanding what the rules are around communication, internal communication, is really, really important to sort of, it's kind of a real cornerstone, in my opinion, for a really healthy culture, and removes a heck of a lot of stress as well.
I'm glad you brought up the kind of policies and procedures around this, because we can write values, we can, quote unquote, lead by example, but in some ways to standardize these practices, these expectations that we have, these opportunities that we have to define behaviors and tactics is important. And I know that's not the sexy part of wellness or coaching or executive leadership, but it can't just all be about listening, and it can't be all about vision boarding. There has to be something meaty there in the middle that gives people an understanding of the how this is going to be lived.
Yeah. And so let me give it like a really quick example here. I'm sharing an example somebody else gave me. This is fascinating. My friend bought a new tent. They went to set up their tent. And in the instructions, it said, hey, save this piece because you're going to need it again later. Like, please save this because in step 12, you're going to need it again. Now, why I say that is because the number of people that come to me for a coaching relationship and we get into it, and the answer to what they want is, I'm not sure, tell me how to do leadership coaching. People need instruction. People inherently need structure. Now, in a relationship with me in coaching, like, I'm going to really push someone to figure out how they want to go about the container, because if you're going to be a leader, you got to lead. And you can start that here. And what the experience that our employees are often looking for is to be held in some way. And to be held doesn't mean caretaking. What it means is holding them to honor their experience, holding them to a level of, like, and I mean this in a good way, discipline of like what we're working toward, and holding them to like what our expectations are. And when you can hold someone in that space, their capacity to actually achieve it is a lot higher than when we're in this space where like it's a little willy-nilly and no one told you needed to save that piece for the tent later on. Like, we're looking at a completely different like story at that point. So I hope that kind of brought us something to kind of look at.
It absolutely does, Derek. It absolutely does. I just noticed we've got another guest on the pod. It just jumped in the car and then gone.
Oh, we did.
We did.
Yeah, I just threw him out. I
hope our viewers stay longer than that.
Like, oh my God, I'm a teenager. This is the worst thing ever. Being
yeah. He turns 13. He turns 13 this week. So I need a different wellness coaching package in a whole different way. But
I think sorry. I think what you're saying, when you were talking there, Derek, I was thinking, it's about holding people to account, to a standard of professionalism. And you're absolutely right. As long as people understand the parameters of how we expect them to behave and how we expect them to work, I think that removes so much of an individual's uncertainty, and stress, not understanding where the boundaries are, not understanding where you can or cannot interject, not what you can say, but when it's appropriate to say it. I think it causes a lot of people a lot of worry, a lot of concern, and they end up then filling gaps, filling silences that they perceive in as as devoid of substance, but actually they're just not being given the psychological safety net, if you like, to be part of the culture of the organization and to know where they sit within it. I don't know.
When you have the bumpers, it's pretty easy for you to like go lead and have your own purview of what you need to.
Yeah. So in the second half of this year, this will roll out, in the summer. What if you're not necessarily in a place with your culture that you should be or you want to be, and you've heard speak of, or you're getting the sense of burnout, and you're going in the wrong trajectory here as it relates to those pieces. What's the goal for the second half of the year? Is it is creating that safe space for staff to be heard? Is it looking at your policies and procedures and seeing where you can start to build some structure? I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but what's the easy first step into this that a chief staff executive could focus on in half of the year?
Yeah, I think like creating some type of plan that can be nebulous still. And that's like, hey, we understand the culture is in this place and we're going to be transparent and communicate that. We need to really hear what you're experiencing and what you'd like. We don't have the answers right now. And to really bring them along on that journey. So I think like, what are the low-hanging fruit? Like being open and transparent about it, number one. And number two, really supporting the individuals and your leadership team to make sure they can provide support and listen and hear. So you have a mechanism to bring all of that in. And at the end of the day, really level setting with your employees, like, hey, we might not have all the answers. We're going to do the best that we can to support you and to like ensure everyone has the well-being. And we will be transparent about where we land in this process versus making promises that you don't think that you can keep. And this all doesn't need to be done with surveys. Like there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I think just like actually being transparent and allowing yourselves to have the hard conversations is going to really go a long way. And I think that's probably the place to start. The one thing I'll share is like, no mess is too big to not be cleaned up. If you don't agree with that, then you're just not willing to clean that mess up. And so for us, it's really, again, looking at what is it that we're committed to and allowing for like those messy conversations to happen in service of that.
I feel like Derek just kind of wrote the intro for the Association Transformation Podcast. We listen, we don't have all the answers, we try our best, we want to advance the hard conversations. And I want to have this conversation again. I want to kind of take this on every few months because it morphs and it evolves as we as an industry learn and as we as professionals hold ourselves and others to high standards and expect to be treated in a certain way and want to treat ourselves that way too. So Derek, again, you used nebulous twice, so you got double bonus points today. And so I think you should come back soon, again, often, and we need to chat about culture and wellness as often as possible.
Would love to. I won't use the word again, though.
You're gonna have to come with a new word next time. You can't use it in back-to-back appearances. So.
And do you see how I didn't screw up my face then? I was like, yeah, we should.
Oh yeah, I saw the open. Yeah, very good forced openness. That's I appreciate it. Appreciate it. Well, everyone, please let us know. We want to listen. We want to hear you. Let us know what you're working on, what challenges you're facing. We will tackle these conversations. We may not have the answers. You're going to see us in all of our real life transparency, and you can find Association Transformation wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, put your members and your mission first.